joined SaaStock a little while ago and are part of their founder circles. It's been absolutely brilliant for us. We first came into it to further our community, our reach, our network, and to learn from some of the world-class speakers that SaaStock has come and speak. And I have to say, it has been absolutely superb for us.
Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, and it's great to have our guest today, Miguel Fernandez, who is the co-founder and CEO of Capchase. Welcome, Miguel.
Hey, Alex. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Where are you today? I heard some beeping cars. It made me think of New York. Am I correct in that?
You're correct. Yeah, I'm in the middle of New York in the Flatiron area. So yeah, out of one of our offices. Very cool.
Very cool. How comes, coincidentally, maybe I've never asked you this, how comes you chose New York for your HQ?
Yeah, so we started in Boston when we were at business school and, in the middle of the pandemic. So we're literally working from our rooms, from our dorms kind of. And then when we started to grow the team, we were trying to find people that had done fintech before, right? So we started hiring, and also it had to be in the East Coast because most of our engineering team was in Europe. So then we started looking at, like East Coast, fintech expertise, and they were all in New York. So we started hiring a team in New York. And then when the pandemic was over and it was time to move somewhere, to HQ, all of our team except two of the founders were in New York. So then we just moved there. And it's great, man. Like the talent is great. The city is amazing. It is very expensive, but then also, again, it's really close to Europe and very well connected.
Yeah. Yeah. I love New York, and I haven't been there since pre-pandemic. So hopefully you get to return, if not this year, next year.
I'll be here.
I look forward to it. Yeah. Good stuff. So Miguel, we always ask our guests the first question, because we want to know a little bit more about who you are as a person. So who is Miguel Fernandez?
Yeah, well, I guess like you already said, like I'm the CEO and co-founder of Capchase, but I think that this is what I am right now, right? I'm originally from Spain, so I grew up there. My mom was an entrepreneur, my dad was an entrepreneur, my grandfather was an entrepreneur, right? So kind of like grew up like with that hunger within me, and then I always liked watching things grow, whether playing with toys where you're like kind of like building something like Legos and stuff like that, and then just trying to figure out ideas and understanding how things work. So in that spirit, I went to study engineering, mechanical, and then nuclear in Munich. And then I never worked as an engineer in my life. So only a couple of internships. And then I worked in consulting, and I felt that the problems that I was solving would never be useful for a company that I built, because they were just like for these massive enterprises, with very like niche problems. So then I actually decided I really wanted to learn from tech and how to actually start a tech company. I tried doing two on my own part-time, and they both failed miserably. So I was like, okay, I need to learn from somebody who actually knows how to do it. So I joined a pre-revenue SaaS company in Spain as the first person in sales. I didn't even know I was going to do sales. I thought I was going to do strategy, which was, like aligned with my consulting background. But then I got there and they were like, hey, you got to call all these people, all these companies and get meetings with them. And I had always hated that. But I did it, and then it worked. And then I actually set up, built and ran the sales and customer success teams, and then international. And then I was like, okay, I think I need to learn a little bit more in order to do it myself. So then I went to do my MBA at Harvard Business School. And that's, where we started researching Capchase, where I met one of my co-founders. The two came from the previous company. And then we started Capchase in the first year of school, and eventually, dropped out. And I feel like now, as you said at the beginning, like all my identity is like somehow intertwined with Capchase, and like that's like all I am. But I like to do other things as well, like helping other founders to figure out, the initial stages of a company and so on. But I love everything tech.
Do you have any spare time for hobbies, or is it all 100% Capchase?
I would say it's like 95% Capchase. I was looking back, man, and for a year and a half since the beginning of Capchase, I didn't do anything. Anything, like not a day off. I didn't do sports. I didn't read, nothing. It was just Capchase. And I feel that now, actually, as like it's more of like working on the business as opposed to in the business. I have a little bit more time to do like sports and read. And that actually makes me much more productive and creative, and makes me like go for longer, and like with new ideas, as opposed to getting stuck. Yeah.
No, 100% agree with that. Good advice. And in fact, actually today, I sent out like to the SaaStock founder members sort of a newsletter, and just kind of like the intro piece was just like, hey, I've just come back from 2 weeks vacation. I didn't do any work, like, because it was a vacation, right? And there was no Gmail, there was no Slack, and that just allowed me to kind of have space, which actually then enabled me to kind of, even though I wasn't really trying to think about work, I thought about strategy, and it just kind of, it was very kind of helpful. So, making sure that you come out the weeds as the CEO and give yourself space and do exercise and read books and all of this sort of stuff. Yeah. It's like super important because it's stuff that kind of helps you move the dial, right? Move the needle instead of being in the weeds, as you said. You mentioned about, like, in terms of who you are, your parents were entrepreneurs and you like building stuff. So is that why you became an entrepreneur? Because you're coming from that background and kind of growing up, or what would you say the reasons are?
I think that background made it easier, because like I grew up, used to seeing people take risks, and then sometimes those risks worked, sometimes it didn't, but it was okay. Like you could always see that, hey, like if it didn't work out, like something else would work out at some point, right? So I think that's a massive privilege that I've had, like in terms of like my mindset and so on. And then I just really, really like, building things, and watching things grow from nothing. So I really like, gardening or like, plants and stuff, right? So then that, like, entrepreneurship is the closest thing to watching something grow from scratch and then having a lot of agency in it. And then I just really don't like being a cog in a wheel, where that if you one day didn't go to work, somebody else would be put in your place and, nothing would happen, nobody would care. I really want to have agency in what I build and then, have a mission that I want to accomplish. And when Capchase came around, I was like, this is what I need to do.
So you built Capchase. So what is the story behind that? The founding story. Why did you build Capchase?
Yeah. So when I was in the previous SaaS company, before business school, I was running sales and customer success teams, and every single deal for 3 years, we had the exact same friction. The customers wanted to pay monthly or late. Like even large public corporations, they wanted to pay 90, 120 days late, right? Well, after the license. And we as a company, as a SaaS company, we needed the cash up front because we had all these upfront costs like, CAC, sales, commission, salaries, marketing, implementation costs, data costs, a bunch of different things, trainings, right? That then, if people paid monthly or late, it would take us a lot of time to recover, and we'd basically be plugging VC money into signing up customers. So then, in order to get all that cash up front and kind of like, get going, and the more customers we signed, the more cash we had, in order to get that, we had to incentivize people to pay early, right? Or upfront with pretty large discounts. So between 20 to 30% annually. And that was terrible as well, because then like we were lowering our average contract value. We're lowering our growth. We're lowering the total, lifetime value, because it was impossible to get people to pay more for the same service over the years. So yeah, it was kind of like the lesser evil, but not great. So then we just thought that was a pain we had to deal with as we grew as a company until we achieved pricing power. Anyways, so then after 3 years, went to HBS, started looking at the intersection between SaaS and FinTech. And one of the, realization moments that we had was like, hey, what if we build a tool that enables SaaS companies to offer flexible payment terms, but get all the cash up front? So imagine that a SaaS company goes and says to a customer, hey, this is like 15K per year. And the customer says, hey, can I pay monthly or late? And they say, yeah, use Capchase for that, right? So then we started talking with founders and they loved it, but they started to ask like, hey, why don't we do this for all of our existing customer base instead of for a deal by deal basis, just moving forward? So then we saw that was a massive pain. Essentially, how can a SaaS founder turn all their customer base into cash now to reinvest into more growth, build a larger customer base, do it again and again and again, right? So they would be less dependent on equity money. And yeah, we started talking to founders, they loved it. That was our first product. And, we started with the mission of, helping SaaS companies grow faster with capital, insights, tools, community, right? So yeah, we went to market at the end of August 2020. So a little bit less than 2 years ago, after raising a seed round. Then we dropped out of school and yeah, started growing like crazy. And now, we are at that really cool inflection point where we are, number ones in SaaS financing. Now we're actually starting to hit on the original mission, like launching new products and so on. And it's a very, very exciting time. And the founders, the way that we got together, 3 of us worked together at the previous SaaS company. I was more in the go-to-market, they were in product. And the fourth one, Shemek, I met at HBS. He came from a growth equity investing background. So kind of like pretty diverse team for the beginning. And now, we've grown a full leadership team, of course.
Cool. Very good. Very good. And congrats on that, the success at a short space of time. What data can you share about the business? You said you're kind of number one in this market. What are the growth rates, headcount, revenue, how much capital have you raised, et cetera?
Yeah.
What can you share?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, like I mentioned, the SaaS space, I think that one of the choices that we made was to just focus on one vertical and do multiple products for one vertical, as opposed to focusing on one horizontal product for a ton of verticals, right? Because, starting with lending, you really need to understand the companies you work with. And then I feel that, when you build different products that complement each other, then you can start to build like brand effects, network effects, some kind of virality if you enable a relationship between two parties. So that's why we chose only SaaS, and it's been a massive, I think it was a great choice in the past, because right now we've seen that companies that were lending to multiple verticals are suffering, right? In terms of how accurate the choice was and how that related to metrics, since the beginning we've raised around $100+ million in equity and $800+ million in non-dilutive capital to give to our customers, So pretty big numbers. We have never thought possible, 2 years ago that was possible, but here we are. And then, for example, last year we grew 20x. This year we're growing like crazy. We're seeing, like a 50% demand growth month over month from March to now because of how weird the environment is for raising money. And yeah, we're working with companies, thousands of companies in 11 countries. So US, Canada, and then most of the European Union and the UK. So, and then in terms of people in the team, 110 odd people, and yeah, growing aggressively, specifically in product and tech.
Great stuff. We've seen at SaaStock, and I've seen the last 2 years, and as you say, the Capchase is just over 2 years old. The kind of the revenue-based financing category, kind of come out of nowhere. There was some previously. If I look back over the years, companies a little bit like Lighter Capital and some others were around, but really the last 2 years, RBF has become a really kind of hot space. But on the Capchase website and through speaking to you and Henrik, and you guys use the term sort of non-dilutive capital. So what is there a difference between non-dilutive capital and RBF? Why do you use those kind of terms? How do you what's the thought process around that?
Yeah, good question. It's quite nuanced. So I think RBF is a subcategory of non-dilutive financing. So non-dilutive is any type of financing that doesn't involve dilution. So usually doesn't involve a change of ownership or like ownership stake in a company. So it could go from like grants to subsidies to, any type of debt, right? So I think the difference, we call it non-dilutive financing because for us, RBS or revenue-based financing involves, some kind of, financing event, like very akin to debt that gets repaid as a fixed percentage of the revenues of a company, right? So then imagine that you take $1 million today and then you start growing like crazy, then you're gonna pay back a fixed percentage of your revenue every month. So the faster you grow, the more money you pay back every month, so the faster you pay back, right? With us, it's not the case, right? It's every SaaS company knows exactly how much you're gonna pay back per month for the following 6, 12, 24 months. So it gets raised to bake into assumptions, it gets raised to understand the cost, and then to basically, build it into the recurring operations of a company.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And given that the space is quite hot, there's quite a few competitors out there. We know a few of them. There's a lot that we don't know. How do you sort of deal and differentiate yourself? How do you think about the competition? How do you differentiate yourself from the competition?
Yeah, I think we took the choice early on to really focus on SaaS and really understand SaaS, and that has allowed us, on the one thing, to have a better price than anybody, and then to build products that help SaaS companies specifically, right? So one kind of flywheel or virtuous cycle is that you start working with SaaS, you really understand SaaS, then you can get a cheaper cost of capital, then you can work with the best customers, then the best customers have the best performance, and then that leads to lower cost of capital, and so on, right? So the flywheel just accelerates, and that's been great. And the second thing is that, from the very beginning, we wanted to help founders to not only access capital, but also understand how much to access, when to access, and then how to put it to work, and the impact that that would have on the business. So we launched an analytics product that helps founders understand everything about the business. So from costs to, cash status, runway, to a bunch of revenue data, like what is the lifetime value, what's the CAC, how do the cohorts look, how do they compare against any other peers, and then, predict when they're going to need more funds and the impact that those funds are going to have on their runway and the rest of the metrics. So what we're trying to do is, instead of just tell them, look, here's $1 million, take them, and use them as you see fit. We're trying to tell them, like, hey, actually, you could access $1 million or £1 million or €1 million, but if the right cadence to draw that money, to make it, the cheapest for you and the most optimal, for a lift in your metrics, is, for example, to take 200K this month. Take 0 the next month because you have a few renewals coming up and you don't need it. Take 250K the following month, and then as the company grows, everything gets calculated automatically, so then they can access more and more capital, so that they depend less and less on their own funds, either bootstrapped or on VC funds, if they are like VC backed. So it's like adding more intelligence to the financing and just focusing on SaaS, so that we understand SaaS better than anybody else.
Do you see, given that non-dilutive IBF is, well, let's say a nascent sort of industry, and I mean, I couldn't probably name more than 10 players, but there is probably like many more than that. I'm sure you know the answer. But do you see, as it's an alternative to venture capital, but also can complement, venture capital, but do you see that, given that there's thousands or maybe tens of thousands of VCs or funds, globally, will this be the same in a few years' time with RBF and non-dilutive? Will you see tens of thousands of competitors, or do you think it will be a smaller kind of concentrated market?
That's a very good point, actually. I think, there are a ton of VCs because there are few economies of scale for being a VC. Actually, like if you have a massive VC, it gets even harder, right? Like you see Andreessen Horowitz with 30 billion under management, they need to return on average 6 billion per year. That gets really hard, right? So actually, like VC, I don't think that many economies of scale. I think in RBF, we are starting to see, some consolidation in the space, because if you are a small player, you can really compete, right? Because you have a much more expensive cost of capital. You have way less data to actually understand a company. So we've had a ton of companies come to us to see if we wanted to buy them, right? Because they were like either local players, or they haven't figured it out, or they're having like bad performance, right? So we are seeing consolidation, and I think that this, if it's tech driven, as opposed to a bank, it can lead to consolidation and have just like a couple of like very good players, because the more that you learn about the data, the more products you can build to solve more pains, and the more sticky you get into a customer, and the more data you get again, which allows you to underwrite better, to have less risk, and then it's sort of like you start getting like exponential development, which I think is really, really hard to get as a VC, right? A VC, like it's very dependent on a person, on a GP, on their expertise, on their previous track record. So I think that there will be a lot of consolidation, similar to like what's happening in banks, right? Like there used to be thousands of banks, and now they're like just a few very big banks in this country.
No, good point. And in terms of, you mentioned around the scalability of the solutions that you have versus the VC game. And I was listening to a podcast actually this morning as I was walking to the gym to give myself some space to think. And they were talking about VC not really being a team sport, but an individual sport. And that, it really kind of counts for the fund. Like you might have one or two individuals that are these star performers that will really kind of, bring in the returns, the 100x kind of valuations, but then you'll have quite a few that are not performing. But here we're talking about the tech and its scaling and, the difference there. So I hadn't really thought about it that way, but good to know. What about like now, like the lessons from building Capchase to date? It's only a couple of years old, but great growth and lots of capital raised, scaling globally. What are your main lessons from building Capchase today?
Man, I think we made so many mistakes and like so many lessons learned, and it's great to see, kind of like the learning curve that we've hit on personally, I think that one big learning lesson is choose or as opposed to and. I think that last year a lot of people were choosing and, including us, like trying to do everything at once because like money was infinite, very, very cheap. You could just do whatever you wanted. Let's try multiple things and let's hire people to do them. Then actually now it's like all about or, like let's be very deliberate. It's almost like, what do you want to do? Like push, like all your strength behind a really, really small area, or all your strength in a massive area where you can really apply pressure, right? So it's like similar philosophy, but choose your shots, and just go all in. And then if you need to like pivot or like it didn't work, then go and do something else, because the feedback cycles, the learning cycles can be way, way, way faster. And then the team feels focused and you really see real progress in a few things, which I think is critical. And then 2 is hire faster and fire faster even, right? So a lot of the time it's like, hey, I think we're gonna need, like a VP or like a person here, and you kind of like try to string it along, and then you suffer, and then when you find that person, then suddenly a bunch of problems disappear, and you're like, shit, I wish I hired this person like 6 months ago. And same with firing, right? The moment that you find that somebody's just not gonna make it, you're just doing a disservice to them, by keeping them in like stuck in a place where they're not going to succeed, while they could be looking for something better for them. And then for the company, it's also terrible because like everybody knows, when somebody's like not performing or when they're just like not in it. And then you can see that kind of like, if people see that, you are rewarding like poor performance, poor behavior, then that really, really can hit culture, right? So anything people related, just like nip it at the bud, and then also, I guess the third largest lesson is to over communicate everything. And that's something I'm still learning, but between what you think you want to say and between what the other person thinks they've understood, there's a massive decay in quality, and then you never know, like if when you're telling something to the whole company, people are on the phone or like doing something else or whatever. So like just over communicate everything and make it very transparent so that people understand what's happening. Because otherwise, people, they feel left out, they draw their own conclusions, they match, this data with this other fact, and then, they start kind of like going down a rabbit hole and getting confused. So yeah, over communicate and communicate very early.
Yeah, no, good, great lessons there. Not good, but great. And definitely I agree with all of those. And over communication is something that I learned and put into practice as a leader, certainly during COVID, because I would hope that most did, but certainly, in like uncertain times, when the team are, you don't want the team in the dark, right? So you've got to basically put everything on the table, and that's certainly what we we did, and it was super helpful, right? It was, let's say, transformative, for people to actually see, hey, look, this is where the business is at, and this is what we need to do, and yeah, like great stuff to over communicate, and we're keeping that on. What about, like you mentioned also, you've raised like 100 million equity, 800 million in non-dilutive sort of capital, which you're deploying in the SaaS companies. Yeah. So you've raised a shit ton of money in a short space of time. Well, what you're obviously good at it. What lessons have you got from fundraising that you can share?
Yeah, in a particular case, it is really different to raise equity than to raise debt or create facilities. Like, let's see, equity, it is, you kind of like want to position the company as, this can be a massive success, and equity investors are aligned to think that, because if it doesn't work out, they lose the money. If it works out, they can make 100, 1,000x, right? Debt investors, on the contrary, are like way more cautious, because if it doesn't work out, they can lose the money. If it works out really well, they're gonna make 2x, So then like it gets really tricky. The experience that we want to provide to founders, is that, hey, raising actually debt or non-dilutive capital should be as easy as clicking a button, right? Like not even like raising equity. But my lessons learned, right, is I think that the market has changed a lot since we raised our Series Seed A and B and now, right? But basically, you should, as a founder, you should think of a company divided in two areas, right? Like the value of a company has two parts. It has the intrinsic value and the option value, right? The intrinsic value is how much is a company worth now, right? Like based on the current cash flows and the current revenue and the current customers, and on everything, like what is the company worth now? And the option value is how much can this company be worth assuming that you hit on your roadmap, that you continue to grow, that you continue to capture your TAM, gain market share, and so on, right? So then that balance between intrinsic and option value shifts. At the very beginning in seed, it's all option value, and then it's more intrinsic and less option, right? The later stage you go, people are going to look at like, what have you built? Like, show me what you've built. And then, yeah, I'll discount aggressively what you say you're going to build because you already have a track record, right? So my advice is, on the one hand, the process, start early, get to know the people that you want to work with, look at what they've invested in, and research them and see who, which GP, which partner in which fund, your company fits in, as part of a thesis, as part of an area of expertise. And then, depending on the stage, I think that you need to get really good at storytelling. So I think that American people are really, really good at storytelling. I think us Europeans are a little bit like more shy, or more realistic, but like get really like storytelling. If this works out, how big can this be? And draw like a very good story between what happens before your company exists. Like, what is the problem that a user is facing, that a company is facing, and then what happens afterwards, right? And then bring them along the journey. Like, hey, life sucks, life is amazing, when after people are using your product and the impact that can cause. And then the further you go, like, you really need to know your unit economics, your metrics, and be able to show them well, like your cohorts, how do people behave, how long do they stay, how do you upsell them, what are the motions? Because then at some point, what people want to know is like, hey, if I give you $1, what are you going to turn that dollar into? Are you going to turn it into $1 of recurring revenue, in which case it's amazing, into 0.5, into $10 of recurring revenue, right? So being able to show like, what does your factory line look like in terms of like, you put $1 here and X dollars come out of here, is critical to get people very excited and to show that you're like in it, that you know.
I'm sure there's been, well, not a million, but a whole bunch of things that have really helped, with the growth of Capchase and the success of Capchase today. But if you could distill it to kind of one thing that has really moved the needle, like one decision you made or the company, something the company has done, what one thing has moved the needle the most for Capchase?
Okay, let me say one thing for the market and one thing internally. I think the market was really helpful and the timing was really helpful. We started in the middle of COVID, and it was the first time, that a bunch of founders all across the world had access to capital that wasn't equity, right? People started to get like government subsidies and COVID relief grants and loans from the governments, and they saw that, hey, this is just money, this isn't, money is green, right? Like, I can use this money to grow the company in the same way as equity, right? So that was a massive, shift in mindset. And also, there are more and more second and third time founders that are really optimizing for a capital structure. And then internally, I think the biggest choice, without a doubt, was to just focus on SaaS, because we gained such a massive advantage over every other competitor. Instead of chasing revenue growth for revenue growth, we focused on SaaS, and that has allowed us to build, a lot of visibility in SaaS, enterprise value for investors, for partners, just like being very good at one thing as opposed to trying to be everything for everybody.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And we love that around focus. And for the listeners, when they're, as you say, don't try and be everything for everyone, really kind of narrow in on your ICP, on your vertical.
Exactly.
And, try and be the best at that. So great advice there. What about the best advice you've ever received, which has kind of helped you?
It's very meta, right? Because it's advice about receiving advice. But I remember, this is kind of like a personal story. I remember when I was like in my second year of uni, I was in summer complaining about how all my friends that were studying, that were not studying engineering could have a lot more free time. We're having so much more fun. We're traveling, we're going out, and I was studying so much, right? And kind of complaining. And then my mother sat me down and she was like, hey, look, why are you saying this? Like, where have you heard this? I'm like, well, it's just like my other friends are just partying all the time, and I'm studying, and I feel like I'm not enjoying this like 5 years of uni because I'm just like studying head down. And she was like, look, you need to understand, when people give you advice or when they tell you something, you need to understand, first of all, where are they telling it from? So what are the circumstances? And two, what do they want? Because if you don't have the same circumstances and you don't want the same, the advice is not worth it, right? So then that actually, I was annoyed when she said that. But looking back, I see that as an inflection point in my life, and then I went to study nuclear engineering in Germany, started, like being very self-driven and so on. So that, when people give you advice, and it's so easy to give advice for free, right? Like understand like, hey, why are they giving that advice, and why does that make sense in their circumstances and with their ambition, and forward looking, and is that applicable to me or not?
What's the hardest thing about being a CEO?
Oof, man, I think it's dealing with a bunch of escalations and people at different emotional stages, throughout the day, and then having to go from one to another very, very quickly, right? So it gets really, like when times go really well or when times are not going that well, you're always like dealing with like micro problems, micro challenges, micro friction, and everything like in the end escalates to you, or the hardest things escalate to you, and dealing, with getting on par, different emotional stages with different people throughout the day is really draining, I think. And then, it's just like, that's what we need, all those like little hobbies and sports and time off. And then like try to get something creative, like reading like fiction and so on, because otherwise you just run the risk of like becoming flattened by the weight of it, right? And then I guess like, this, you said at the beginning, but like it's impossible to switch off. Like whatever you're doing, there's always a part of your brain that's thinking about problems, about opportunities, about ideas, about how to communicate things, and that gets tough as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I'm aware, and I know most entrepreneurs that I know that I've spoken to, kind of say it's very difficult to, or almost impossible to switch off, as you said. And you could just be in the kitchen, and I'm staring into space, and I'm thinking about either, I don't know, good things at work or whatever, or just kind of work in general. And Gemma, my other half, she's just like, hello, like, what are you thinking about? Like, what's going on? I'm like, well, just in a different zone.
Totally.
And it happens that's just like, daily basis. And I think you get used to, or your partner gets used to living with an entrepreneur like that. But I also know, but this is more anecdotally, a lot of CEOs, and founders have unfortunately, separated from their wives or their first wives or husbands, because they're constantly 24/7, thinking about the business. And sometimes it's very difficult to put your partner or family first, because sometimes they put the business first, and that obviously is not a good sort of mix, for long-lasting relationships, right? So you got to find that balance for sure. What about your daily routine? So Miguel Fernandez, Monday to Friday. So we don't care about the weekend so much, but what do you do? You on a daily basis. What time do you wake up? What happens between that and starting work, during work? To the time you sort of like go to bed. What does a daily routine look like?
Yeah. So let's see. We have a big team in Europe as well. We also have a team in SF. And I'm living in New York, right? So I'm kind of like in the middle of time zones. So I try to wake up quite early, around 6:15, something like that, so I can get a workout and then go to work early, around 8 or 8:15. And then I have quite a decent overlap with Europe as well, right? And then the mornings are usually filled with meetings, because that's when I can speak with the international leaders, with the tech leaders that are in Europe. And then in the afternoons, I have more time for, thinking, and then meeting with people, like virtually most of it, to be honest, meeting with people in the US, in any of the coasts, right? And then at the end of the day, I'm going to more and more live events, maybe like one a week or something like that, to meet other founders, set up like kind of like a founder support group, where we just like go through problems that are pretty much horizontal across any entrepreneurial business, and help each other out, with sharing best practices or like just like giving support. And then I try to see, friends every once in a while for dinner, during the week, just connect and just like disconnect from work and connect with them. And then I try to read at night, just to kind of like wind down. I don't really watch TV that much, only when I'm like working out or like on the indoor trainer, in the bike at winter, because I don't know, man, I feel like I feel like it's not really productive, or like I don't learn much. So I'd rather read, like really like just like go on a different universe than watch TV. Oh,
What time do you go to bed?
I call my mom every morning, or pretty much every morning. I go to bed at like 11, something like that. So try to get at least like 7 hours. One thing that I do is that no matter how late I go to bed, because sometimes you're just working or you can't sleep or you like go to bed at 2 or 3 a.m. I never ever wake up later than 6:15 or 6:30 and miss a workout, right? Like, because then when you do that, that's when like you get jet lag, right? Like your whole schedule shifts. Yep. And then I'm grumpy or moody, so I don't miss that.
Yeah, I find out. How often do you work out? You work out 5 days a week, 7 days a week?
I'm probably like 6 days a week. So during Monday to Friday, it depends, like varying level of intensity. And then on the Saturdays, I try to do something with friends, like call it tennis or running or, boxing, whatever. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I mean, from my experience, I'm now, working out 5 days, maybe 6 days a week. And I have a very specific routine, from like waking up to, doing a bit of reading, to exercise, to walking the dogs, to having a shower, then a cold shower. And if I don't do that, my morning is terrible. Yeah. Like I'm like all of a sudden really grumpy and just a very different person. So you need to kind of, stick to that and to find what works for you. Now, I'm just conscious of time. So obviously you're speaking at SaaStock in Dublin this October. So excited to welcome you to Dublin, and probably the best live event you'll go to this year, I'm sure. Do you know what you're speaking about yet? And also, Capchase, are going to be there. What will Capchase be doing? Any secrets you can give for those that are listening?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so excited to go. I really know. I mean, since I've met you, and we've done like a couple of virtual events, like I know the quality is going to be super, super high. I'm very excited. I think what we're going to talk about, we're thinking about like what would be the most relevant thing for SaaS founders. And I think, it's kind of like knowing how they should be doing, right? Like a lot of the questions that we get is like, how are my peers doing? Like, am I doing better? Am I doing worse? Am I going faster? Am I going slower? How much should I be spending in these areas, right? According to my state. So fortunately, we have all that data from thousands of SaaS companies, right? So I think that we're going to structure the chat about what does, good look like? What does great look like? And then what are the key lessons that we've extracted from thousands of companies and thousands of founders, to help just other founders, kind of like avoid mistakes and skip steps, in order to make a great SaaS company. And what we're doing at Capchase, I think we are going to try to connect with as many founders as possible. We love meeting them and learning from them. I think we're going to be organizing, I don't know, like drinks or a party or something with you guys, just to get people to mingle as well among them and disconnect and form relationships, which is like the key thing on all live events. Learn, meet other people, and get better as a company as well.
Definitely excited for that, and we know data-driven talk go down really well at SaaStock. So given that you've seen inside thousands of SaaS companies, I think a lot of good data to share. So that'll be exciting and will be fun times as well. Awesome. 2 final questions. So favorite business book, if you have one, and what are you currently reading? And then where can people find you online, Miguel?
Nice. So favorite business book is, I think it's The Everything Store. It's about Amazon. And why I liked it, to me, it was like a little bit, like opening eyes, like, wow, this is so cool. I really like 2 things. I really like the flywheel effect, on how they talked about Amazon flywheel, which is like, again, like lower prices, get more volume, that gives you less prices, then you get more customers, etc. Right? So the flywheel effect, which I think about flywheel all the time in Capchase. And then I also like that thinking about, hey, what parts have you created? What technologies have you created to run your business better? And is there a way in which you can actually sell it to somebody else? Like AWS. They did that to manage their own warehouse. Then they said, hey, this is amazing for everybody else. And now it's the highest gross margin, the fastest growing product that Amazon ever built, right? So we think about that as well. And it's something we're putting into practice. And right now, I just finished reading a couple of books. One is Crucial Conversations, which is about, it's actually like business book, whatever. It's about mining for conflict, like getting teams to perform better by being willing to have hard conversations and how to have them, which I think is a critical skill for any founder and any executive. And now I've actually started reading a book called Maybe You Should Go and Talk to Someone, which is about a therapist that goes, to see a therapist as well, and it's just like I'm really interested in human psychology, and how people think and how they react to emotions and so on. So trying to learn more about that.
Very, very cool. You reminded me that I still haven't read The Everything Store, and I need to. So definitely going to do that. And Crucial Conversations. I mean, they all sound like good picks. I haven't read any of them, so we'll add them to my list, and I'm sure many of the listeners too.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Good stuff. And where can people find you online, Miguel?
On LinkedIn, Miguel Fernandez, or Twitter. I think it's Miguel, Miguel F. Larrea. And then my email, I'm very approachable, miguel@capchase.com.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, Miguel, thanks so much for coming on the SaaS Revolution Show. Really enjoyed speaking to you, learning from you today, and thank you so much for sharing your lessons with the SaaStock community. Super excited to see you again, in October at SaaStock 22. And so, can't wait for that. So thank you so much, Miguel Fernandez, CEO and co-founder of Capchase.
Thank you so much, Alex. Likewise, it was great to chat with you, and you made me think a lot and learn in the process. So thank you so much. Looking forward to SaaStock.